Greetings, everybody, and welcome to today's show. Today, we're going to be doing something a little bit different, and we have a new smart sister. We're hanging out with all the smarty smurfs, right? So, today's show is all about goddess vibes. We're going to be bringing you some goddess vibes today, okay? And we're going to be having a conversation with Anodea on reclaiming the feminine face of the divine, and we're going to talk about the god and the goddess. Both words are in one word. So it's going to be quite interesting, right? And I want to invite you, Anodea, to share with us a little bit about your book before we dive into today's conversation. So we'll kick it off with that.
Goddess, Blessed Reunions with the Feminine Face of the Divine. And there's a little goddess on the cover, and just came out a couple months ago. And it is really all about the divine feminine and how it's so missing from our culture and what we have lost as a result of losing the goddess, really, who was wiped out from civilization and plowed underground to the point where people dared not mention her name for fear of persecution until we lost that. And we've lost half the godhead.
Yeah, and that was an awesome way to start the show. I love it. I already have a lot of questions cooking up, and I'm sure that this will take us down a really, 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 really fantastic rabbit hole. But before we dive in, I want to remind all of our listeners that we have shared, as we do on all shows, Anodea's bio, her background, which is intense and in depth, in the description. So please make sure you go in there, take a sneak peek, click on the links. You will learn more. She has written several books, not just The Goddess, and one is right behind her there, is She Rises, which I had a sneak peek about. I read a little bit of the excerpt. So just have a sneak peek, look at the description, and share your thoughts with us. Let us know what you think, and we will share that feedback with her as well. Okay, so Anodea, I think we should start from the basics.
Okay.
Can you explain to us from your perspective, from your standpoint, with the experience and knowledge you have gathered, what and who is a god and who is a goddess?
Well, if you can imagine that the absolute, the great absolute, whatever is out there, however you decide that to be, the abstract creation of all things, as it comes down into manifestation, religions have talked about it in all different ways. It splits into day and night, dark and light, splits into masculine and feminine. Then, the masculine, we have the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. And the feminine, we have the maiden, the mother, and the crone. And then in the goddess tradition, there also goes to a kind of polytheism of gods and goddesses. So there's a god of the sun and a goddess of the earth and a goddess of the moon and, god of fire and feminine gods of fire. I mean, there's many different gods and goddesses of all the things that we relate to, where the life force is affecting everything we do. And so the goddess is half of that. And it's a half that we don't acknowledge very much. In fact, she's been really denigrated, and everything associated with her has been somewhat considered negative, like ritual and celebration and pleasure, sexuality, the body, all of this, joy and pageantry and color. All of that was part of the goddess tradition. And it's been eliminated in favor of this detached asceticism that is more of the masculine. Now that has its place, but we've lost some vital things in the process.
Yeah, we did. And just when you mentioned the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, and then at the same time you mentioned what I got to look at as the stages of womanhood, maiden, mother, crone. I was wondering, what was your thought process? Because you mentioned them like they're working together in synchronicity or they're like going hand in hand. How do those work together? Do they mesh or are they just separate?
Well, I think the real correlation for the masculine god would be the youth, the father, and the elder. And then we have maiden, mother, crone. Now, in the book, I actually talk about a fourth category, the queen, because I find that many women these days, we live longer than we used to. We have fewer children, or many women choose not to have children at all. And they say, well, I'm done with my mothering and I don't feel like I'm a crone yet. I'm still working, I'm still contributing. And they're giving back to humanity in a big way. And that's the queen phase.
Mm. Can you talk a little bit more about this queen phase? Because I think you've opened quite an interesting box here. Because a lot of people I think are still stuck, and I like that the conversation is evolving beyond, maiden, mother, crone. I like when things are evolving, and it means we are adding on to this, this book of knowledge, right? So,
Yes.
can you talk a little bit about the queen? Go a little bit in depth because this is some juicy stuff, and where you're going with this, and also relative to the goddess.
Well, many people think of a queen as just the wife of a king. And that is, again, the sort of masculine overview the lens that we look through. But in the goddess traditions, there were, Isis was the queen of all the gods. Inanna, the Sumerian goddess, was the queen of heaven and earth. So the queen was something in her own right and a very powerful ruler, but the queen is always contributing. She's not controlling. The king manages things. He manages the world, but it was said often the king was married to a priestess. So she dealt with the spiritual world and brought that to the king. And if he honored her in the realm in which she ruled, then he brought her wisdom into the ruling of the kingdom. So there was a partnership there. Um, but the queen, Inanna, queen of heaven and earth, their long myth about how she went up to heaven and she was given the gifts of all civilization. And then she had to go to the underworld and meet her sister who was giving birth and experience, the death and resurrection. And by that time, having all those initiations, she could be the queen of both heaven and earth. So the Queen's Act is one of service, of creation, of really serving more than ruling.
That's such an interesting perspective because when people hear the word queen, and I'm talking about both genders here, they tend to think about it as a takeover. It kind of looks like whenever you talk about goddess energy or anything to do with a goddess or a queen or the feminine archetype, from her viewpoint, and you zoom in on her, it kind of is seen as something negative, like, oh, it's a takeover. Oh, now the matriarchy is coming to replace the patriarchy, but it's not. So I'm glad that you clarified that. It's way more than that. And I think we should take it a step further. Can you share with us what an individual, right, whatever gender they are, can they embody, these god, queen energy, for lack of a better word? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not just, it's not about XX, right? Chromosome, right? It's more than that, right?
It's more than that. But the key word that you just said was embody,
Hmm.
because the goddess religion is that the divine exists within everything. It's in you, Faith. It's in me. It's in my cat. It's in the trees outside my window. The life force is in everything and to be celebrated as sacred. And so in this, we are always worshiping the life force itself. And if you deny that, you have its opposite, death. We have wars and killings and things like that. And we're not honoring the life force. So yes, it works in partnership. You can't create life without both masculine and feminine. And this is not about the feminine dominating. Not at all. It is about creating a partnership model, but we can't have a partnership until we have an establishment of equality between the masculine and the feminine.
Yeah, and that brings me to my next question. What is the role of the goddess in all her essence? And I say her because, we always talk about, it's always he, God. And so
Yeah.
the goddess is the her, the God is the he. I'm simplifying things, but it's bigger than that, as Anodea has explained. But my question is, what is the role of the goddess and the goddess energy and those who embody the goddess energy? What is their role now in government, in politics, in family, in the community today? And we know what's going on today, right?
Oh, we know what's going on today. Yes,
Yeah.
right. Well, this is a very important question because if let me backtrack a little bit to some of the waves of feminism. You know, back in the 60s with women's liberation, it was about women saying, you know, I want to go into the workplace. I want to earn my own money. I want the rights that men have, right? And that was a wave of feminism. And so women did go into the workplace, but they went into a masculine world. And it's like we were so excited to have a place at the table, we didn't question how the table was set. Now, I think the current wave of feminism is how do we bring feminine values back into politics, back into economics, back into religion and spirituality, back into the important aspects, you know, healing. There's been feminine ways, and those ways of collaboration and listening and allowing and, you know, compassion, those have been somewhat denigrated as, oh, we can't have that in politics. And what we find with the, you know, denigration of the goddess came the denigration of women. And, you know, there's only 22 countries that have women at the heads of state. You know, very few have equal number of men and women on board of directors. You know, I'm American, and here in America, it's about 25% of women in, you know, political positions of the House and Senate. We've never, in 240 some odd years, had a woman president. So, you know, women have been kept out of the world that makes the decisions and sets the values for humanity. And we are paying the price.
Yes, yes.
With a model of domination that is disempowering people, that is creating a huge gap between the rich and poor, that is creating environmental crises, health crises. You know, we've lost the ways that are not, it's not like the masculine is bad. A way that I put it is, you know, biologically, men have a thing and women have a place. Well, men have created a world of marvelous things, computers, airports and trains and airplanes and cars and, you know, a world full of things, but they've trashed the place. And we need to take care of the place for our survival.
You know, they could say the same for us, right? They could be like, you know, it could be like, no, it's you women who trash, listeners, we all take responsibility here. But Anodea makes a very good point here. If you look at government and the positions of decision making, pick a country, it is men, making the decision. And as you're talking about, when you said men have a thing and women have a thing, it took me back like to Africa. Like there's a statement we use, like we say men are the physical manifestation of things, and women are the spiritual manifestation of things. So when the women are trying to make a point across, they're like, can you just let us do our thing? But we need to find the balance if we want to make it work.
That's right. That's right.
You also made a good point about the role of the goddess in building society, in politics, and government, and peace and reconciliation, and changing the whole structure of things right now. And it made me think about things we all know. There's proof in our families, in our communities, that whenever you give a woman something, if you give her $100 or pounds or whatever your currency is, krona or shilling, she will go and shop for the whole community. She'll buy stuff for her grandma, great grandmother, and so on and so forth. Can you talk a little bit about this and make people really understand how this goddess energy works?
Well, if we go back archaeologically, where, it was only recently in digging into the ground that the goddess was discovered and that there were figurines of the goddess all over. What they did not find in those burials was weapons. And that indicates that the goddess civilizations were peaceful. Crete, which was the center of, goddess worship and had a, very rich economy and trade and high art and drama and creativity and writing. It was one of the more powerful places in the world in its time. They did not have any war. It wasn't until, the huge eruption of the volcano came and buried Crete that then they were dominated by other tribes coming in. So, in terms of peace, in terms of economics, the women have a different way of going about it. When women are part of a peace negotiation, it's found that the peace lasts longer and is more accepted by the people. But women are rarely allowed. There's only been one signature of a international peace agreement in history, and that was a woman from the Philippines. So, we have to be allowed into these places. They find that when women are on boards of directors of companies, the more women they have, the more successful the company is, the less employee turnover they have. So, when women are part of things, they go better.
Yeah. And I know some people live in countries where they see a lot of women, female empowerment. And I want to remind you all that your country is not the whole world. There are places that women have not even scratched the surface, and there are places in Asia. I know today, I think Nepal, and I could be wrong, because if you're Nepalese, feel free to correct me on this, but there are certain countries right now where even when a woman has her menstruation, she still has to be isolated. And I
Mhm.
picked such a drastic example because this is embodiment of the goddess. She goes through these different changes in her life. It's something she goes through, and she's punished for it.
Right.
This is a direct feedback of
That's
what
right.
society thinks of you. And when you were talking about ritual, and why this also it was sitting in my mind, is because when you talked about the goddess ritual, I thought about the red tent.
Yes.
The red moon, the red tent. These I have seen in movies and read in some books, but I don't know much about it. But for someone who's reading a book on the goddess, I think you're the best person to walk us through what this really means. What was going on here?
Well, this is when women were isolated during their menstrual cycle. But what happened is when they were isolated and put in the red tent, as it was called, they connected with each other, and they shared their goddess wisdom, and they shared their stories, and they collaborated, and they celebrated, and it was actually a gift to them. They were removed from their day-to-day stuff, so it could be seen as a punishment, but it also was a gift. And out of the red tent came a powerful sisterhood.
That's what was going on in the red tent.
Yeah.
There's so many stories out there, and I was like, something is missing here, because it was always, if you read from the religious context, it was not a good thing. So yeah, I had to ask you that, and I'd like you to, for the second part of our discussion today, I'd like you to tell us what inspired you to write about the goddess, and
Uh,
why now?
well, it's an interesting story how it came to me. Many years ago, I discovered the goddess, and in 1985, which was almost 40 years ago, I was ordained as a priestess, and that was not a common thing in those days. And I vowed in my ordination to serve the goddess above and beyond all else in my life. That was my vow. And so I did, and I was high priestess of a community that got quite large, and we had our own land and celebrations and festivals and school and whatnot. And then my career took a turn, and I started teaching about the chakras. That's what I'm most known for in the world, and traveling around the world. And the goddess took a little bit of a back seat, at least publicly. And but I had started writing a book about her back in the 80s in my priestess days. And I put it away on a shelf, and I was cleaning my office about a year ago, and I found that, and I read some of it, and I went, I wonder if you're ever going to do anything with this. And literally 2 weeks later, I was in a Zoom call with my evolutionary leaders group, and I wound up in a Zoom breakout session. We all know what those are now. And
Mhm.
with this woman, the publisher, Ariel Patricia of
Mhm.
Sacred Stories. And she said, I would like to talk to you about writing a book on the goddess. And so this came to me, and I went, funny, I found this
Wow.
manuscript where I had written 4 or 5 chapters. And so this must be meant to be. So I said yes.
Wow. So that's how it happened. And then what did you discover on the journey to writing the book?
I did, I rekindled my love for the goddess. And,
Mm.
I just figured writing this book, whether I make money on it or whatever, it was my tribute. It was my honor to bring forth what I know about the goddess. And I'd been praying for a while to bring me back to that priestess path, because I felt like in my public career, I'd gotten away from that somewhat, and my private life was still there, but, I hadn't claimed it publicly. And it's interesting because my doubts about accepting that was that, when, if you talk to a group of men, for example, and they say, "Oh, what are you writing now?" Like I went to a party while I was writing it, and there was a group of men talking deep talks about philosophy, and they knew me, and they knew me as a writer. So, "Oh, hi, Anodea, what are you writing?" "Oh, I'm writing a book about the goddess." "Oh, okay." They go back to their conversation. And the thing is, people consider it this feminine frilly stuff that
Yeah.
is sort of a subcategory and not taken seriously.
No, they talk like it's Cartoon Network or something. And,
So, I doubted whether this would actually serve my career or give me more of a discount. Oh, she's just this new age frilly goddess girl. But we have to change that. There's certain words that we have to reclaim, like crone and witch, and these were words that had great power at one time, and we have to reclaim them in their rightful way.
and how do you think the concept of the goddess can I don't want to say become modernized, because what does that even mean? But how can it evolve or find its place in the modern world?
Yeah, well, it's a good question because so many of the rituals and practices and philosophies of the goddess were completely destroyed. The literature was destroyed, the statues beheaded, the temples were destroyed, the practices, the people who practiced them were killed. So we have lost so much of what's there that we can't recreate what is there. And people I know who are in this religion or in this spiritual framework say it's this religion that we are both remembering and inventing together. And so when
Hmm.
you say, how do we bring it into the modern times? It's our own creativity, because that what that means that we lost so much is there can't be any dogma, because no one can say this is what they did and you have to do it that way. So this religion is being recreated, and we're finding some things, but we're beating her drums again, we're serving her holy chalice, we're celebrating, we're dancing the dance, we're singing her praises. These things are happening in living rooms, in backyards, in public parks, where women and men are coming together. And I want to say that goddess religion is not just for women. Not at all. The men that come into this are very happy men. They are cavorting with goddesses. They're being treated like a god. They're with women who know who they are and have their own power and earn their own money. The men are very happy. And because it's embodiment, there's a lot for the men too to embody themselves. And it brings back the sacred in relationship.
Yeah, and I agree with you, because a lot of women, because like you so clearly have said it, you've explained it really, really well. We've been left with fragments. There's a lot that is missing, and now putting together the pieces. It's like collecting different pieces from there and from there, to put it together. And I think a lot of men who understand this and get it, they know that there's so much power in I don't want to say being in a relationship or being in communion with a whole woman,
Mhm.
one who's not fragmented. They get it because they can see it and they experience it, and they don't feel dominated, or I don't know, they always paint the goddess to be something so controversial, but it's just saying God and goddess. It's just,
That's right.
that's how I see it.
Yeah.
And so if you're okay saying God, he, it's, what's the problem? You know what I mean with saying
Oh,
goddess?
exactly. But there was a time when people could be killed for even uttering the goddess's name. So that went through the generations, and that was passed down from, mother to daughter to keep the daughter safe. Don't you ever talk about this. This is secret, until it wasn't even, it was secret, it was completely lost. It just was forgotten. And then it had a negative connotation. The body has a negative connotation. The earth, we denigrate the earth. We say it's all about spirit, it's all about the afterlife. No, it's about this life right here, right now. You and me in this conversation and all our listeners. It is about the life force. And if you don't worship the life force, then you're courting death. I say that the goddess is not God in drag. She's not Jehovah with lipstick. She's not Allah wearing a skirt. She is a wholly different entity and the other half of creation. We're living in a broken home in this society. It's like we've grown up with a single parent father and never even knew we had a mother, never allowed to mention her name, no memory of her, no talk of her. And the father doesn't even date. So what's wrong with this picture? Aren't we missing something vital? As a psychotherapist, I know that if a client came to me and grew up with a single father who had no women in his life whatsoever and never had a mother, I know that that client would have some wounding to be healed.
Yeah, I think that a lot of women, I think some women don't even know this, but they're fragments. It's one-sided. When you're in these religions, all the gods are he, and where do you fit in? Not to be in competition with anything, but you need to be, if you're praying to a god, surely, and you're made in the image and likeness of God, you need to question this. You're made in the image and likeness of God. you know can you walk us through this? Because when you mentioned that the history of if you mentioned the goddess, if you did the rituals or anything, you could be killed, right? Are we looking at epigenetics thing? Are we looking at the remnants? What is going on? Because it's still, and this is women and men, we're not just talking about men. Women also will be like, oh, put
Well,
that,
they are. Yes,
take it
women
back where
also
you
will
want.
be afraid of the word. Yeah,
Mhm.
I don't think it's about genetics or epigenetics even so much, but that would be an interesting question to look into for a biologist. But it is the collective consciousness that we're dealing with. And in the collective consciousness, something very vital has been suppressed and removed. So that means we're not playing with a full deck. We're not on the full spectrum of humanity. And when you say we are made in the image and likeness of God, well, what does that mean for you and I as women, right?
Mhm.
I don't have a beard sitting on a throne. If the God is male, then the male is God. And then what does that make me as a woman? And I remember as a child saying to my mother, Mommy, why is God a he? And what does that mean? And of course she said, oh, that means everyone, right? Well, God gave his only begotten son to save mankind. There's no feminine at all in any of that. And it leaves women out. And it leaves us trying to act like men because that is how we get accepted. That is how we succeed in life. That's how we get recognized. And the archetypes of women's leadership are not honored or recognized or rewarded.
Yeah.
That's what my She Rises was about, the archetypes of women's leadership, archetypes that have been lost, like the priestess or the oracle or the midwife, archetypes that are just emerging, like the activist, the benefactress. The benefactress is a woman who comes into money and shares it with her community, like you mentioned earlier. So we need to understand these archetypes and realize that they are other ways of doing leadership that we typically don't reward or recognize.
Yeah. And I want you to maybe help us demystify um the words you just said: the witch, the oracle, even Mother Nature, Mother Earth. Let's demystify these words, because when we say these words, sometimes it's, oh, it's a witch. Oh,
That's right.
oh, oracle. I think people visualize some woman like in the movies, some woman with a cauldron and a hat and some cats. And, can you help us demystify the witch, the
Yeah.
oracle?
Yeah. So let's start with the oracle and the priestess, and then we'll go to the
The
witch.
priestess, yes.
Oracles were some of the most highly respected members of society in Greek culture. The oracle at Delphi was a sacred place in the mountains
Mhm.
of Greece, and kings and generals and powerful people traveled, hundreds, thousands of miles to consult with the oracle. And whatever she said, and it was always a woman, whatever she said would either start or end a war, or, it was like the divine truth. And so they were
Mhm.
some of the most respected women of society. until, again, the Oracle at Delphi. It's all in ruins now. The
Yeah,
priestesses
it
were
is.
raped or killed, and that was the end of that. After
Mhm.
millennia of being the spiritual capital of the ancient world. The
Mm.
priestess was someone who served her community. She was a midwife, she was an herbalist, she was a ritualist, she was a songster, she was a teacher of the old lore. She had the wisdom, she studied, she was educated, and she conducted the rituals of life and birth and death and marriage and things like that. There were important rituals to keep things sacred in society. Now, the witch comes from more post-Christianity and from Wicca, meaning wise one. And so she carried the wisdom, and the witches were the midwives, again, the herbalists. They were like priestesses, only since priestesses had really been knocked down from society, the witches were more of an underground. And so it was, had to be done in secret, which is why it was cloaked in shadow. That's why they were always dressed in black. It had to be in secret and not be seen because it
Mm.
was dangerous. And then, of course, you could be accused of being a witch for any reason whatsoever, just for being a powerful woman. And this was a
Mhm.
way that, the church actually got a lot of its money, because if you were accused of as a witch, and put on trial, put on jail, burned at the stake, whatever, they took your farm. They took all your resources. And that was a way that the church enriched itself financially at the cost of women who were burned at the stake. But it became so dangerous to practice to do tarot cards was dangerous, to be powerful. If a woman was too uppity, if she argued with her husband, oh, she could be accused of a witch. It had nothing to do with even if they practiced the old ways. The word pagan was from paganus, Latin for country dweller. Heathen was someone who lived on the heath out in the country. So the old ways were the ways of nature, and then they were denigrated. It was this insult to be a pagan, insult to be a heathen. Oh, those heathens, those
I know the
people.
misuse of words.
That's right. That's
Sorry,
right.
go on.
So we need to claim these words.
Yeah, and when you talked about the god, the Delphi, the women, I thought of mythology
Yes.
and how I find a lot of the female stories are, I like to say, hidden in mythology. If you want to know your story as women, I think, start developing a relationship with mythology books. You'll learn a lot about, your story. And you also have some stories in your book, The Goddess, right? In your
Oh, yeah.
Goddess book.
Many.
Yeah. And I'd like you to tell us why the mythology is important for us to understand.
Yeah. So once upon a time, stories were all we had to weave together the fabric of a culture. And the stories gave us the why of why we're here. They gave us the moral compass. They explained things that we could not explain. And then when science came along, you could say humanity took a giant step forward. But what happened to myth is it became equated with a lie. Oh, that's just a myth.
Mm.
Just a myth
Mhm.
means, oh, that's not true. Um, and the myths were not true in the literal sense. I mean, even in Christianity, Jesus walked on water. That's more of a metaphor than, someone literally walking on the surface of water. Um, so the myths were true as an allegory, as a teaching. And what happened when you could say we took a step forward on our right leg with science, but we can't take the next step forward unless we step on our left leg, right? I mean, that's the way we walk. And so we're kind of stuck. Science tells us how, it tells us what, it doesn't tell us why.
Mhm.
Understanding the ink on the dollar, getting it down to the smallest particle does not explain the economic system, you know?
No, of course.
Taking the sample of blood from a politician does not explain our political systems. It's not the way it works. We have to look at the whole. And so myths were ways of explaining the whole, and the stories are teaching stories. So yeah, I have a lot of myths in the book. I talk about at least 4 myths for each aspect of the goddess, maiden, mother, crone, and queen. Plus, the middle section of the book is people's own stories of their encounters with the goddess And I wrote the
Mm.
first and last of that section with my own stories.
Yeah. For somebody listening who thinks, I'll play devil advocate a little bit here, who's thinking, oh my God, they're talking about that goddess stuff. This is not, this is some archaic stuff. Why are people even talking about this? We're in the modern times. What would you say to this skeptic who thinks that the goddess is not relevant today? It's something that's archaic. It was in the past. It should be left over there. We should move forward. And, they're just like very skeptical about this.
Yes, well, let's imagine it the other way. Let's imagine we're in the goddess culture and it's peaceful and it's prosperous and it's joyful and people celebrate and they're healthy and, they're connected with nature and they have this lens into the future. And they
Hmm.
see a world where people are dropping bombs on each other, where people have no home, where they don't have enough to eat, where women can't even let their hair come out from under a scarf without risking being killed, where women are not allowed to be educated. And if you were in this, prosperous goddess culture looking forward into that, would you say that's better? So it's like we have to turn the tables a bit and say, wait a minute, this is what's happening in a world without a goddess. This is what is happening when men rule alone and don't have the goddess to balance them.
Yeah, and I want to share this with our listeners because I think I cut it, but maybe you correct me if I'm wrong. But I think you shared some very, very good insights to the women listening, how they can identify whether they're a priestess, whether they're a witch, and whether they're an oracle, because you very clearly went through the qualities and what they would embody, the embodiment. So if a woman is listening to this and wondering, who is she? What is she? Where does she fit in this whole picture? If you listen to this again, you can actually tell, are you an oracle, are you a priestess? What kind of embodiment do you have? That was a really cool explanation you shared there. If people caught it, I think I did. But correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe I took too much out of it. When you want to add and correct me, go for it.
Well, maybe you're talking about my She Rises project, which was the archetypes of feminine wisdom. And there's many, what these are is a series of cards, and the whole book is written on the cards. So it's equal to a whole book because there's 38 archetypes and they're explained from the archetypes speaking directly in the I voice to the she section, which tells you all about her history or her standing in the world. And then you, which is when you work with this archetype, how do you embody it? What does it mean for your life? So I have 38 different archetypes. This is the initiator. This is the peacemaker. And it's all about women creating peace. Let's see, hold this so you can see it. The trailblazer, which is more of a modern archetype here. Here's one of the older women, is the mistress of play. Right. So we have lots of the shepherdess. The shepherdess is the leader that is bringing things. Let's see if I can do it right. Up
Yeah, we can see them clearly. I see them all perfectly. I think
up from
everyone
the
can see.
rear, instead of leading out front, she's making sure everyone's taken care of, that everyone at the meeting has the notes and has water to drink or coffee, or, she's making sure the student that is lagging behind is brought into the whole and given extra attention. So she's looking after the flock, you know.
Hmm.
Um, of course, we have the mother in
Hmm.
archetype. Here's the priestess. And these ones I've just been talking about, the oracle. And this is actually Delphi in the background, the creatrix, and we have the cutter, which is the queen of death. She's the one that says, we have to downsize the company. We have to, we have to get rid of the excess. We have to say no once in a while. We go to peace and rest. We have to complete things. She's not a bad thing, but she is an aspect. So, and the yogini is a modern archetype. I'm trying to get it out of the box here. And it goes on and on. So,
Hmm. Wow, I didn't even know all that. I just took it from what she said before. It was so beautiful to me. I think I caught that. And please, if you listen to this woman, you can. Sometimes I think we can step out of the labels and take the what you're defining, what you're the message behind, because sometimes these labels, people say, oh, they hear a label, they push it away without actually getting the gist of it, the substance of what is actually being said. And I think we need to revisit the gender embodiment, because I think maybe some men will listen and they have missed this, because Anodea explained that when we talk about the goddess, we're talking about the embodiment of an energy, of an essence, of both male and female. We have both aspects. The women have the goddess energy and aspect, the men have it as well. But I just think it's important to repeat this and maybe walk through it again, because when you were holding up the cards, I was thinking those are also male
Oh, yeah.
energies, just in case people are seeing a woman and they think, oh, that's just woman stuff, the Cartoon Network stuff, and they want to move away. Just walk us through the cards, the goddess energy, the embodiment of the god, both aspects, how it works.
Yes, well, it's interesting you talk about this, because when I was first creating the cards, I was sharing them in circles where women would come and they'd take a card, take it back to their seat, read it. They would stand up and they would read the I, the evocation, the archetype speaking, and they would awaken powerful energies in them. They would cry, they would shake, they would feel like some superpower had been recognized that they'd never had recognized. And they were so excited, they wanted to come back and bring their husbands. So I said, okay, that's fine. Men are welcome. But I thought, well, what happens when a man draws these cards? Because these are feminine archetypes. And I did that because the male archetypes of leadership are well known in the world. We don't really need that so much, although I have outlined a whole other deck for men that I could do. But what I found when the men picked these archetypes and did the same process, go back to their seat, read the cards, stood up and read the card in the I voice, is they had powerful reactions. They shook and they cried. I mean, there was a man once who said, I'm going to pick the empath archetype because I'm out of touch with my feelings. So he said, I'm just a guy that doesn't show feelings much. And he read it and he stood up and he got halfway through the I part, the I speaking, and he was crying his eyes out like he had not cried in years, because it touched something in him. So for men, the feminine has not been allowed. In the masculine world, to show feminine characteristics is sometimes the worst insult. Oh, you're effeminate, you're a sissy, you're a pussy. They even use that word, to describe a feminine man. And it's always an insult, unless you're in the gay community or you're younger people who are now playing with gender in many different ways. But, in the classic mainstream culture, masculine has been defined as everything that's not feminine. And you better not let the feminine show. But this gives men permission to let their hair down a little, permission to relax, permission to say, I don't know. Let's talk about it. Let's collaborate. Permission to ask for help. Permission to, not have the pressure of holding all that power on them, have equal partners. It's a real gift that men don't even know they're missing.
No. It's a huge gift. Can you explain to us from your perspective, why this is so important to work in equal partnership? What is being brought to the table from both sides? And especially once a woman embodies, now that we know what the goddess energy means, once she embodies that goddess energy.
Yeah. Well, it's sort of like saying, what could we say now that we have the whole alphabet? You can only say this much when you have only half the letters of the alphabet. What can we play in music when we have all the notes of the scale instead of half of them? What can we paint in color now that we have the full spectrum of colors and we don't just have green and blue? So what is possible is that we're now playing with the full, if we have this partnership, we're honoring the masculine and the gifts that the masculine brings, which are many gifts. It's not denigrating the masculine. It's just the masculine has been going it alone and gets a bit distorted. So we have the gifts of the feminine, the gifts of the masculine, the gifts of the mother, the gifts of the father. That is how we create a healthy family. And then we can experiment with gender. We can be fluid. I mean, that's what young people are really experimenting and finding, I don't like this classic definition of feminine or masculine. And that's great because we're not in these little boxes. But if we're experimenting with that, we don't want to experiment again with only a few colors on the palette. We want to have the full spectrum and then experiment from there.
Yeah. I want to ask a question which I think could go both ways. So you can pass on it if you feel faith. No, not this one. But I am curious. This is my own observation. Sometimes, Anodea, I feel that a lot of women are scared of their goddess energy.
Yeah.
I think they're even scared of exploring it, of discovering it. Even when it peeks its little head and it shows them who they are, they kind of just want to rebuke it away, send it away, just shut it down. Like, this is not me. I don't want to this. And I'm not sure why. I know you talked about the history of it. Maybe it's coded in the DNA and all that. But my question is, times are changing. We're here now. You have a book on the goddess. Are we ready as women? Are we ready to bring back that balance? Because we talked about Mother Nature, which is very, very important. Maybe you could also touch on that. There's a lot of work to be done. Let's just be real, right?
Oh,
So, this is just one of those things you can say, hey, but that's my observation. And I don't know what your thoughts are on this.
yeah. Well, it's interesting. I'm working with a group of women from my evolutionary leaders group called the Feminine Force Collaboratory, and we are working on something called a Founding Mothers Movement. And in the meetings, a lot of the women who are very high-powered women, well-connected in the world, it's a global movement, they say, well, we don't want any woo-woo. We don't want any of that goddess stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm kind of like, hey, if you don't include that, you're missing something vital. But even the women are doing that, as you say. And it is because the association with it has been such a negative connotation that they go, well, no one will take us seriously if we talk about this. If a woman goes to a business meeting dressed in a frilly skirt, she will not be taken seriously. If she's in a business suit and she's all, put together and, slim and, whatever the masculine says it's supposed to be, then she might be listened to. But she comes in all goddessy, she is discounted. She is given less importance, and this is something that is risky for women's careers, for they're trying to get acceptance in a male world. And that means they have to live up to the male standards. So identifying with the goddess and the feminine is costly. It is for me in daring to write a book about the goddess, that my otherwise, well-known branding in the world is like, well, what's this? Is she going off on a limb? It's not a big pin in my resume in the world. I do it out of service. But in the public eye, it's not a big, item on the resume.
No, it's not. And this is why I just wanted to put it out there, because the work has to be done. The balance has to be restored. You mentioned that we need to play with the full deck. Now, how do we play with the full deck when we have a lot of women who are scared of even looking at the deck?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, that's why I created the deck of these feminine archetypes.
Yeah, but they're scared of looking at it. You
Yeah,
know what I mean?
I
This
do.
is like, what do you call it? The elephant in the room,
Yeah.
but they feel it. Like, I know, Anodea, you talk to a lot of women, they know it behind closed doors. They're like, oh my God, I felt right now what we're talking about, it resonates.
Yeah.
But they will not want, like you said with the women, they will not want to personify it or to accept it in the public work or, but
Yeah.
that's where the work has to be done, because you talked about the role of the goddess in politics, in government, in the companies. These um these qualities are required in these places.
That's right. That's
So
right.
that's my question. How do we get these women to say, I'm just gonna do
I think
it?
this is where, even though I say the goddess movement is not just for women, and men can be very happy in it too, there is a place for women getting together in women-only spaces where they feel safer to experience this. And I myself have a women's group that's been going 11 years. And whenever I get together with them, it's like, oh, this is what I am. You know, we create a beautiful meal and we light candles and we start with a sense of the sacred and we do some embodied movement. And, in my work, I can become very masculine. I've got to get this done. I've got to do my branding. I've got to do my social media. I've got to push, 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 build the company, whatever. That's the kind of ideal that we've been given. But when we get out of that and we experience a female-only space, we are reminded of what we are. And then when we go back into the male world, we can embody that because we've been reminded. And I think it's really important for women to invite men into the feminine space. And we've gone into the masculine space forever. To invite men into the feminine space and say, come and taste what we have here. Sample it. You'll like it. And when men come to it, here's what they say. They say, this feels like coming home.
Yeah.
And it's coming home to the goddess. And I say that home stands, HOME, stands for Holy Order of Mother Earth.
A Holy Order of Mother Earth. That's nice.
And we all like home cooking, don't we?
It's natural. I also think sometimes women are scared their husbands or their partners or family members who are male might not accept it. And I know they will. Because I think also there's all that woo-woo stuff. That's why I requested you to demystify these things. They're not woo-woo, scary, cold war. It's just women embodying. Really, I mean, you said you're dancing, lighting candles. We light candles when we're making dinner. We make a nice dinner. We have candles on the table. What's the problem? You know what I mean? We do these things already.
Yeah.
So when the men are invited, then they know that there's nothing really spooky. Domineering happening.
And then tell me that going, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, when you come into a church or across the threshold, tell me that's not woo-woo if this is, I mean, it's like these things are considered woo-woo and those things are not.
I can go down the woo-woo rabbit hole of the church. I will not. And that's the thing. There's real woo-woo stuff happening, for real. And it's not even coded, but you do it. And this is normal stuff, scented candles. It's just nice. It's what women like,
Yeah, I think it's just making a moment sacred.
A moment sacred, you said?
Lighting the candles or singing a song, it's to make the moment sacred.
Yeah. And I think it's healthy as well. Could you touch on that a little bit, the health benefits of embodying the goddess energy with the things that you're saying? You said movements, you said dance, you said the sister safe spaces, how healthy this is and what it brings out when you can have a strong sisterhood and do these things.
Yeah, one of the aspects of, removing the goddess who is embodiment is that we have a very disembodied culture. We live in our minds. What you do with your mind is paid more than what you do with your body. If you make money through your thinking, you get paid more than if you're a laborer and you work. And in this disembodied culture where we're sitting at computers staring at screens all day, or we're on the phone, or we're sitting still, disconnected from nature, that's not healthy. It's not healthy for the organism. When pleasure is denied and made evil, even that brings up its shadow. Sexuality and pleasure, when it's denied, it brings up the shadow of rape and pornography and child molestation. Those are terrible things, that demean women. So, but when we celebrate sexuality as sacred, we don't have to hide it, and it doesn't go underground then. So that brings us to more health. It brings us to more sexual health. It brings us, when humans are happy and experiencing pleasure, they're less likely to get sick. When we feel our bodies, when going to school is not sitting at a desk all day when you're 7 years old and being told to be quiet and be still, that is not natural for a 7-year-old. So we're sending everyone out of their body from a young age so that they can stay out of their body and be, go to work and have some kind of job in which they do that. And we have, international health crises, international environmental crises, international financial crises. These are all things that I say are related to the first chakra, which is the element earth, and by denying that, we have these worldwide crises.
Oh, yes, the element of earth. Oh my goodness, you just opened a huge box there, Anodea.
Well, the chakras have been my kind of claim to fame. So looking at the society in terms of the chakras is something that I talk about quite a bit.
Yeah, but you just connected it's I like when things are practical and you can apply it today. You just really explained what you're doing relative to the earth and the chakra. So
Mhm,
you live in this earth, so you are contributing by not embodying yourself and all the things you explained, you're actually affecting your own home. You know,
mhm,
it's like real with every step you make, with every action you take, this is affecting this, and then we wonder why we're dealing with the repercussions of dryness and changes. And I mean, there are many reasons why the earth is changing, we know that, but we also have a responsibility to be in alignment, I think.
mhm.
And,
Well, if we're talking chakras, they all have a sacred element associated with them. So chakra 1 is earth, chakra 2
yeah.
is fire. I mean, water. Chakra 3 is fire. Chakra 4 is air, sound, light, and thought. Well, let's just take the second chakra, which is also emotions and sexuality. It's considered bad to be emotional, bad to be sexual, and that's the water element. The water element is very out of balance in our world. We have floods,
Mm.
droughts, and it's not well balanced. So I think that there's a direct correlation to having denied and dammed up, literally, built dams and rivers, the water element, and it's overflowing in some places and not flowing at all in other places. And the desert cultures that don't have much water are typically more patriarchal. Just saying.
Anodea, your art, when you mentioned that art show, this is really, I mean, it's really a whole show, because right now we are watching what you're talking about. It's happening everywhere. And it's sometimes the extremities, and our body is water.
Mhm.
We are
That's
water,
right.
yeah.
Yeah,
70, 60%, the percentages vary, but we are water beings.
that's right. Yeah.
So this is some
We are
serious
emotional
stuff.
beings also. The emotions are our reaction to what we want and what we don't want. Oh, I love that. I want that. Oh, I'm afraid of that. I don't like that. I'm sad because I have that. These are our yes and our no. And when you take that away, people are out of touch with their yes and no. And then it goes underground. They don't notice that they feel bad until they get sick.
Yeah, and when you think about the woman and the feminine, I'll say the feminine I just say archetype because the first thing that comes up, I mean just the embodiment of the feminine, maybe principle, or what we call woman. When you talk about this goddess energy and we think about everything that has been lost in history, and in how women are represented and their positioning in different cultures and countries across the world, it's so important that we really realize that this is very serious, because when you don't give her the rightful position, she's also showing up and affecting the movement of the earth. She's affecting the earth as
Gotcha.
well. So when you eliminate her, you will deal with the consequence. Whether she's ignorant, she's knowledgeable, it doesn't matter. She's alive, she's a being, and her energy is being, she's in act, she's, what I get from what you've said, we are in motion,
Mhm.
voluntarily or involuntarily. You know what I mean? And I think it's so
That's right.
important. And when you talked about what we say and not say, the yes and the no, I was thinking about how women for many years, I think centuries, they have been made to shut up. Women, they're so imagine you don't even have a yes or a no, you have a zero.
That's
You
right.
have nothing, you have no voice. It could cost you your life. So this is some very serious
In
stuff.
my workshops, when I work with the chakras, for instance, the fifth chakra, which is communication, it's amazing how many women have this little tiny voice. And I say, can you
Ah,
speak up? Can you let the sound out? They are terrified, just terrified. to speak up and be loud and be heard. But women's
And
voice is really needed right now.
yeah, and have you noticed there are women who modulate their voices depend on the environment? Sometimes they talk like a little baby, like a little child, and then they talk differently. And I always wondered, what is that? What is going on with this?
It's just the fear that if you're too powerful a woman, you get knocked down.
Oh, that's what that is.
Yeah.
Anodea, this has been so incredibly interesting. This has been fascinating. It's been really, I've really enjoyed this. This has been really, really good. I'd like to give you the platform before we head out. I want to thank you first for coming to our platform and being one of our smart guests and our smart sister. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I want to give you, the floor to take us out of here. If there's anything that we forgot to talk about that is in your book that you'd like to share, also share where people can reach you and where the book is and anything you want to share about your work.
Well, you can find the book on Amazon. Goddess is just called Goddess, Blessed Reunions with the Feminine Face of the Divine, green cover. And the She Rises, you can only order off my She Rises Movement website. So sherisesmovement.com. But what I want to say is welcome home. Welcome home to the Goddess. That means coming back home to your body, coming back home to what is natural, to what fits, coming back home to your community. In the hero's quest, which was, espoused by Joseph Campbell in a number of myths around the world, the hero finds the community is ailing and goes out to adventure to seek a healing for the community. And they face all sorts of, challenges and ordeals. But the final step in the hero's quest is to bring the elixir of healing back home to the community. So the final step is the return home. And I think that humanity has been on the hero's quest for quite some time. It's now time to come back home to the earth. That is, we have 8 billion of us living here on the planet. We're not living in the sky. So to come back home to mom, to home cooking, to the holy order of Mother Earth, and to the love of community and the love of diversity and celebration and joy and pleasure and color and pageantry and music and dancing, and find your way back home again. And in that, there is a glorious rebirth.
Beautiful. I think we should just leave it there. That was a beautiful message to take us out of here. To all our listeners, thank you, thank you, thank you for hanging out with us. We appreciate you all, your support and your love, and all the knowledge you share with us as well. Your feedback as well is always valuable. I want to remind you all that all Anodea's information is in the description part of this interview. So please remember to stop by and take a look and connect if you see fit. Okay, if you feel moved to do so. Okay, thank you, everybody. Until next time, goodbye.
Thank you so much, Faith.
You're welcome. My pleasure.